The wind pierced the thin fabric of his storm jacket, instantly chilling his body to the bone. Igor Dyatlov stood on the windy mountainside, feeling the snow burning his bare feet. The temperature was dropping rapidly, turning every breath into a thick cloud of stinging white vapor. At that moment, he did not yet realize that he was alone with the merciless elements. An endless black night stretched out around him, swallowing all familiar landmarks and sounds. The torn tent behind them flapped in the wind, resembling a wounded bird with broken wings. Everything changed in a second when an invisible threat forced them to abandon their only shelter. There was no turning back because all their warm clothes and shoes were left inside. The horizon was empty, hidden behind a thick veil of snowstorm, and he knew it well. Igor took heavy steps down the slope, sinking into deep, loose snow. No one had prepared him for such an ordeal in the face of the indifferent white mountain emptiness. He continued down toward the forest because stopping now meant certain death. With each passing day, and now with each passing minute, hope was fading. He was not afraid of death itself. He was terrified of freezing to death here and never being found. The world continued to live its life, but for him, time had stopped forever on the slope. The temperature outside the torn tent dropped so low that even breathing turned into crystals. These tiny ice crystals instantly settled on the hair and thin clothing of the people who had gone out into the night. The horizon, which had recently promised a path to the summit of Otterton, was now hidden behind a wall of snow. It was February, the depths of the Ural winter, where time and space lost their usual meaning. At that moment, they ceased to be explorers proudly carrying the Institute's pennant to the edge of the world. In a second, under the crackling of the torn tarpaulin, they turned into mere mortals fighting for their lives. At first, no one wanted to say it out loud, watching the wind carry away their hopes. They still believed that salvation would come as soon as they descended to the safety of the trees. But everyone understood that the situation was getting worse with every second spent on the windswept mountainside. Panic spread faster than the cold, causing people to act chaotically and completely illogically. Some already understood how it would end. Looking at their rapidly turning blue feet without shoes, they looked at each other in the darkness and saw only the reflection of their own animal fear. The team began to crack under the pressure of the unbearable physical and mental trials of that night. No one wanted to take responsibility for the decision to leave the only shelter on the mountain. Igor still remained calm, trying to gather everyone together, but this did not last long. They were divided not only by the icy desert of Kolashekhl, but also by the growing doubt about the correctness of their orders. At that moment, they ceased to be a cohesive team and became just a crowd of freezing people. They began to slowly retreat downhill, hoping that the forest would protect them from the cutting squall. The most dangerous enemy was not a mystical fear of the unknown, but the rapidly approaching Arctic cold. They still hoped to wait out the storm below, build a life-saving fire, and wait for the bright morning. From that day on, the expedition was over, and a blind, desperate struggle for survival in the frozen winter taiga began. Some were already mentally saying goodbye to home, realizing that there was practically no chance of returning. They still acted as a team, supporting their wounded comrades, but they thought like doomed people. The question was not whether all the participants in this nighttime icy descent would survive. The question was only which of them would be the last to remain on this windswept slope. It was a moment after which everything changed irrevocably and forever for every tourist. History had already begun to unfold according to a completely new, catastrophic, and frightening scenario of death. There was no way back as the torn tent remained far above, hidden by a thick blizzard. None of them yet understood the real scale of the merciless natural cataclysm happening around them. They still hoped for a miracle as they descended into the pitch darkness of the snow-covered old Ural forest. But hope did not change the cruel reality that began to loom over their moving column. The world was too far away, hidden behind hundreds of kilometers of impassable winter Ural taiga. Help could only come from themselves, but they were already losing their last precious strength. On that day, the countdown to their lives began, a relentless process of destruction of flesh by frost. It was not the end, it was the very beginning of a real, cruel test of endurance. From that moment on, time became their main and most ruthless enemy in the snowy darkness. Nature made no distinction between strong guys and fragile girls, freezing everyone in exactly the same way. Everything was decided here and now on the steep and merciless descent to the distant centuries-old cedar tree. A long way down awaited them, and not everyone would make it to the end. The trap snapped shut, leaving them alone with the cold, which knew only how to wait patiently. January 1959 began with the sound of train horns and lively songs accompanied by an old guitar. Students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set off on a hike of the highest difficulty level in the northern Urals. They were young, full of energy, and absolutely confident in their acquired hiking skills. Igor Dyatlov carefully planned the route, taking into account all the possible difficulties of the harsh winter taiga. The expedition was supposed to be a triumph of their training and endurance in front of their entire institute. The goal of the trip was to climb Mount Otter 10 and Mount Oikachakur in extreme winter conditions. The group members underwent a rigorous selection process, and each had experience of serious taiga crossings. They sewed warm boot covers, designed a special metal stove for the tent, and dried crackers. The preparation took many long months, filling their daily lives with joyful anticipation of a great and difficult adventure. No one could have foreseen that these homemade items would become their last weak line of defense. Igor led confidently, competently distributing the heavy load and determining the best places to spend the night. In the evenings, they built a hot fire, sang heartfelt songs, and recorded their impressions in a shared diary. They left some of their food in a forest storehouse to lighten their backpacks as much as possible before the decisive assault. This sensible tourist move would later become a fatal circumstance for them, depriving them of food reserves. The horizon ahead cleared of trees, revealing bare slopes constantly swept by winds. The forest ended, and they entered the mountain tundra zone, where completely different laws applied. Nature ceased to be a hospitable hostess, turning into a cold, indifferent, silent observer. Igor's decision to spend the night on the open mountainside still causes a great deal of controversy. He categorically did not want to lose the altitude they had gained and descend back into the safety of the forest. They pitched their tent directly on the snow, digging a deep hole to protect themselves from sudden gusts of wind. It was a test of their equipment and fortitude before the main ascent to the summit of Ortartan. They still hoped that the weather would take pity on them and give them clear skies in the early morning. But hope did not change the harsh reality that was rapidly closing in on their temporary camp. The temperature was falling rapidly, crossing the -20-degree mark on the harsh Celsius scale. The wind grew stronger and stronger, turning into a dense stream of icy air that beat against the canvas with force. They went to sleep, huddling close together to preserve precious grains of warmth. At that moment, they finally ceased to be a team of conquerors and became hostages of the altitude. The world was too far away, safely hidden behind hundreds of kilometers of impassable snow-covered Ural taiga. Help could only come from themselves, but they did not yet realize the full extent of the danger looming over them. They continued to talk about the route, but believed less and less in its 100% successful completion. The silence between them inside the dark tent became heavier than the howling mountain wind outside. None of them yet understood the scale of the impending natural disaster outside. It was the evening of February 1st, the last relatively calm night in their broken lives. They still called this piercing cold a delay, but the mountain had already turned into a deadly trap. From that day on, the expedition was over, and a blind, desperate struggle for survival in pitch darkness began. The question was no longer whether they would conquer the summit of Otter 10 on the next sunny day. The question was solely which of them would live to see the next cold dawn. Night fell on the slope of Kolatsiakal with a fury that none of the sleeping students had expected. The wind howled like 1,000 wounded animals, trying to tear the tent from its secure snow anchor. Igor lay in the darkness, listening anxiously to the crackling of the old canvas. Tarpaulin stretched to its limit. Suddenly, something happened that would remain forever hidden under the thick snow and the relentless passage of time. An unknown factor destroyed their fragile world, forcing them to act on basic instincts alone. It was a moment after which everything changed irrevocably and forever for everyone present. In the confined space of the cold tent, an oppressive, unbearable wave of primal animal terror arose. Panic spread faster than the Ural frost, infecting the minds of experienced and previously courageous tourists. Someone grabbed a knife and began frantically cutting the thick fabric from the inside, desperately looking for a way out. They scrambled outside in what they had been sleeping in: socks, thin sweaters, and long johns. No one had time to put on shoes or heavy storm jackets, which lay uselessly at the bottom of the tent. The blast of frosty air at -30 degrees burned their lungs, instantly taking their breath away. It was a turning point when years of discipline gave way to a deep, irreparable crack. The group found themselves on an open, icy slope, completely defenseless against the wrath of the merciless winter. It was the first day of their real harsh test, which would last less than a day. Igor still sincerely hoped that they would be able to build a large fire below and quickly warm up. He calculated the options for rescue, forcing his freezing brain to work at the absolute human limit. But nature made no distinction between the leader and his followers, freezing them all equally. Everything was decided here and now on the steep and merciless night descent to the old cedar. There was no way back as the torn tent remained far above, hidden by a thick blizzard. Attempting to return against the hurricane-force winds without warm shoes was tantamount to deliberate suicide. They decided to descend, and this logical consequence proved fatal for the entire group. The situation deteriorated rapidly, sapping their precious strength with every passing minute. The cold methodically and mercilessly drained the last of the heat from their poorly protected bodies. Some members of the group began to slowly fall behind, stumbling over sharp rocks hidden under the snow. Igor returned, lifted them by the shoulders, and forced them to move on, through the growing pain and weakness. He still acted like a responsible leader, but he was already thinking like a man doomed to die. The horizon was completely empty, and he knew it, understanding the gravity of their situation in the mountains. No one heard his hoarse cry as he tried to cheer up his friends who were freezing to death. He was not prepared for what would happen next in the forest, which they mistakenly believed would save them. From that moment on, time became their main enemy, accelerating the process of severe frostbite many times over. They stepped uncertainly into the darkness of the taiga, hoping to find shelter from the biting mountain wind. They still desperately hoped to wait out the storm under the protection of the centuries-old tree trunks in the river valley. But the storm was just beginning, gathering its monstrous strength over the entire snow-covered Ural Ridge. No one knew who would survive until the gray dawn in these inhuman climatic conditions. They began to economize their words as much as they economized the pitiful remnants of their internal heat. The silence between them became heavier than the howling wind, foreshadowing an inevitable and very imminent end. A huge, spreading old cedar tree became their only fragile refuge in this icy night hell. They reached the edge of the forest, but the strong wind penetrated even here, giving them no respite. Their hands were so numb that their frozen fingers would not obey them and refused to bend even a millimeter. Igor forced the group to urgently gather dry branches, breaking them with their unresponsive, bleeding hands in the darkness. The slow destruction of the human body entered its most active and irreversible phase. By some incredible miracle, they managed to build a weak fire that barely glowed on the frozen hard ground. The fire dimly illuminated the faces of people who had lost all hope, distorted by pain and piercing cold. The warmth of the small fire could not warm their bodies, clad in thin, wet knitwear and woolen socks. People huddled so close to the dancing flames that the fire burned their numb white skin. The physical consequences were inevitable: severe frostbite of the extremities, muscle weakness, and uncontrollable convulsive tremors. Igor looked at his companions with resignation. realizing the utter hopelessness of their desperate situation. They tried with all their might to keep warm, but the cold took its toll, penetrating deep into their flesh. Some were already calculating in their heads who would be the weakest link in this chain of freezing people. They continued to talk quietly about rescue, but believed less and less in its practical reality. The two most frozen guys lay down right by the fire, their shivering bodies no longer convulsing. This was a sure medical sign that their bodies had completely stopped fighting to maintain their temperature. Igor clearly understood that this fire would not save them all, and that new drastic decisions had to be made. He sent part of the group deep into the forest to try to dig a cave in the thick layer of snow. He himself decided to make a crazy attempt to return to the tent for warm clothes. No one had prepared him for such total loneliness on such a frightening and empty black slope. He stubbornly continued to crawl because stopping meant immediately falling asleep and dying forever. With every meter of the steep climb, hope became thinner and thinner, turning into a ghostly illusion. He was not afraid of abstract death. He was afraid of not reaching his freezing friends and not bringing them their things. The world continued to live its life, but for him, time stood still in this icy trap. He began to speak quietly aloud, just to hear a human voice in the roar of the endless blizzard. He realized that the most dangerous condition now was not the piercing cold, but the heavy despair that was weighing on him. He no longer counted the days or the passing hours. He counted the remaining slim chances of survival. He did not know if he would survive the night, but he continued to cling desperately to the icy slope. Hallucinations began to slowly cloud his mind, creating false images of saving warmth and light. Igor's body refused to obey the commands of his fading brain, freezing in the terrible night frost. His movements became extremely slow and intermittent, his breathing finally turning into a hoarse, quiet whistle. He instinctively curled up in a fetal position, trying to preserve the last remnants of warmth in his chest. It was a slow, detailed destruction, not only of human flesh, but also of the great human will. Snow began to cover his motionless, cooling body, turning the man into a small white mound. Below, by the old cedar tree, the fire had finally burned out, leaving only black, frozen embers. The remaining people tried to warm each other by removing the clothes from their companions who had already died. It was a terrible but absolutely necessary step to prolong their own lives for a few hours. Moral barriers collapsed in the face of the primitive animal need to preserve life-saving warmth. They still acted as a crew, but thought like people who were absolutely doomed to die. The moment had come when the last glimmers of hope melted away in the icy darkness of the taiga. The survivors finally realized that no one would come for them in this hurricane. It was a terrible emotional breakdown, the likes of which an ordinary person could never experience. They looked into each other's empty eyes and saw there a final, irrevocable verdict. Help could come in weeks, but they didn't even have a few minutes to spare. Those who desperately tried to take shelter in a snowy ravine faced a new deadly threat. The thick layer of snow above them could collapse at any moment, burying them alive under its weight. The cold penetrated the makeshift floor of branches, turning the shelter into a deep, icy grave. They huddled together, listening to the wind howling monotonously in the crowns of tall, coniferous trees. The realization of the inevitability of imminent death paralyzed their minds, depriving them of their last strength to fight the circumstances. Igor Dyatlov lay on the mountainside, no longer feeling any pain in his numb hands. His consciousness was fading, slowly sinking into the warm, deceptive veil of pre-death chemical euphoria. At that moment, he did not yet understand that he was completely alone on this huge slope. Zina Kolmogorova and Rustem Slobodin also fell into the snow while trying to crawl back to the abandoned tent. Hundreds of meters of white emptiness separated them, but they were dying in exactly the same way at that moment. No one wanted to take on the heavy responsibility of giving up completely, but fighting temperatures below -30 without clothes was physically impossible for a human being. From that moment on, time became their main enemy, mercifully and smoothly hastening the end of their suffering. Nature made no distinctions, taking the lives of strong young men and athletic young women. Everything was decided here and now. in this lost, God-forsaken corner of the northern Urals. A long journey into oblivion awaited them, and everyone would go through it to its logical conclusion. None of them understood the real scale of what was happening anymore. Their freezing minds mercifully shut down. They still hoped for a miracle in the very last, fleeting seconds of their fading human consciousness. But hope did not change the reality that had firmly encased them in a heavy, icy shell. The world was too far away to hear their last, completely silent cry for help. Some were already mentally saying goodbye to home, remembering the warm city kitchens and the faces of their loved ones. They were still lying together, but each was dying in their own, completely lonely world. The question was not whether everyone would survive. That question had long since lost all meaning. The question was who would be the last to freeze to death in this cursed, snowy place. And that last person would drink the cup of despair to its bitter, soul-chilling bottom. The forest around them stood as a silent, indifferent witness to their slow, painful, and very quiet demise. The trees could not shelter them from the cold, and the falling snow only accelerated their loss of heat. It was the moment when they stopped fighting forever and simply let the cold take them. In a single second, amid the howling wind, they turned into motionless, white ice statues. The story of their ambitions ended, giving way to the eternal mystery of this nameless mountain pass. They were alone, completely alone, alone with the cold, which knew only how to wait forever. And this endless waiting was more terrifying than any storm they could imagine. The loss of hope was the final nail in their invisible, wind-blown snow coffins. They fell asleep, never to wake up again in this cold and indifferent dead world. Mount Kalatshyakal claimed its victims, fully living up to its grim and ancient Mansi name. Long, anxious weeks passed before search parties found their snow-covered trail. Parents bombarded the institute with phone calls, begging and demanding that their missing children be found at any cost. Helicopters circled over the taiga, searching from the air for any signs of a camp or traces of people. Rescuers, consisting of students and experienced hunters, methodically combed through square after square of snow. No one wanted to believe the worst, hoping that the group had simply gotten lost in the dense forest. On February 26th, searchers stumbled upon a torn tent on the mountainside. The belongings were completely untouched. The food was laid out, but there were no people inside. That was the moment when everything changed for those who had been searching for them for so long. There was no turning back. It became clear that an unforeseen and very terrible mass tragedy had occurred. None of the rescuers yet understood the true scale of the natural nightmare unfolding here. Following the tracks leading down into the valley, they found the first frozen bodies in the snow. Yura Doroshenko and Yura Krivonyshenko were lying under a huge old cedar tree next to a cold campfire. They were stripped down to their underwear, their skin taking on a strange, frightening reddish hue. The burns on their hands indicated that they had tried to keep warm until the very last moment. Nature did not try to save them. It simply preserved their bodies in a frozen, pristine state. The other 4 tourists were found only in May, when the deep snow began to melt actively. They lay in a ravine under a thick layer of dense fern on a homemade platform made of branches. Their bodies had terrible injuries, broken ribs, punctured skulls, and an inexplicable absence of eyes. These injuries gave rise to hundreds of theories, from a violent avalanche to secret weapons testing. No one knew what exactly had killed them in that dark and cold spring ravine. The investigation reached a dead end, unable to explain the logic of their actions that night. The official conclusion was that an irresistible force of nature had forced them to flee their tent. It was a convenient bureaucratic phrase, concealing complete helplessness in the face of the mystery of wild nature. The world was too far away to leave living witnesses to this monstrous massacre by the Ural frost. Help could have come, but it was fatally delayed for a whole long and cold month. The bodies were brought to Sverdlovsk in closed zinc coffins so as not to frighten relatives and townspeople. The funerals took place in a very tense atmosphere, under the close supervision of the special services and the police. People whispered, trying to understand who or what had killed 9 healthy young people. On that day, a new mythology began, one that would outlive all the participants in those distant events. It was not the end of the investigation, but the beginning of an endless, years-long search for the truth. The belongings of the deceased were distributed to their relatives, and their diaries were neatly filed away in a thick, closed criminal case file. The photographs from their last rolls of film were developed, capturing their happy, endlessly lively faces. These smiling people in black and white photographs contrasted sharply with the horror of their cold death. A long journey to the summit awaited them, but they remained on the slope forever, becoming a legend. Nature made no distinctions, taking their lives with frightening and utterly cold calculation. The pass was named after Igor Dyatlov in memory of the tragically deceased group of young students. This place has become a symbol of the greatest mystery of the 20th century, attracting hundreds of brave explorers. The consequences of that February night still echo in numerous articles and books. They survived as best they could, but hopelessly lost the battle against the impossible conditions of the environment. The way they were found left far more questions than it provided clear, logical answers. The story of the Dyatlov group is not a tale of heroism in the face of a sudden natural disaster. It is a chronicle of the absolute, paralyzing helplessness of people trapped in a deadly natural trap. Mount Kolochakhl had no malicious intent to kill them on that cold, dark February evening. It simply existed in its usual state of critically low temperatures and hurricane-force winds. The tourists were in the wrong place at the wrong, fateful, deadly time. We will never know for sure what exactly made them rush to cut open the tent from the inside. An avalanche, infrasound, military tests, or simply panic. These are all just unproven theories of researchers. The main thing is that, finding themselves in the cold without shoes, they were doomed. Nature does not try to kill them deliberately. It simply does not try to actively save them. It is completely indifferent to human ambition, youth, experience, and Komsomol badges on their chests. Their bodies remain there in deep snow for long weeks of eternal and cold silence. The world moved on, launched man into space, survived wars and historical changes, and they remained forever young tourists in old black and white college souvenir photos. Time stopped for them at -30 degrees on the slope of Mount Oterten. They became an integral part of this harsh landscape, its darkest and most compelling legend. Every time a new expedition sets out for the pass, they search for new answers there. But they find only rocks, howling wind, and the same silent, indifferent white emptiness. The mountains hold no secrets. They simply erase all traces of human presence with powerful blizzards. All that remains are guesses based on the location of frozen bodies and scattered belongings. The truth is hidden under the weight of years as reliably as under the harsh February snow. From that moment on, time became their main enemy, mercifully and forever freezing their fears. Nature made no distinctions, taking all 9 into its cold, icy collection. Everything was decided here and now, in the darkness, where there was absolutely no room for salvation. A long journey awaited them, and no one had ever made it to a safe and happy ending. None of them returned home to tell the truth about that last night. This tragedy reminds us how thin the line between human life and death is. One mistake, one torn tent, is enough to turn a modern person into a defenseless victim. We build huge cities and harness the atom, but the Ural frost kills us just as easily. The story of the Dyatlov Pass is a chilling reminder of our weakness and physical vulnerability. And this terrible lesson is written not in ink, but in frozen blood on the white Ural snow. When you look at the falling snow from the safety of your warm home, just remember them. Remember the absolute darkness and the wind that knocked down exhausted, freezing people. They disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind the most terrifying unsolved mystery of the last century. The Arctic cold of the Urals did not kill them quickly, granting them hours of unbearable, screaming horror. It simply waited for them to surrender to its icy, deadly embrace.